Welcome back to the Umbara Project. Today we are exploring one of the most important Mandalorian turning points in the Clone Wars. What if Bo-Katan Kryze killed Maul before he could take Mandalore for himself? And what would that single act do to Satine, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, Anakin, Order 66, and the future of Mandalore? To answer it properly, we have to begin not with the Siege of Mandalore, but years earlier, in the throne room where Pre Vizsla believed he was about to prove that Mandalore belonged to warriors again. By the time Maul challenged Pre Vizsla for leadership of Death Watch, Mandalore had already been transformed by a conspiracy that almost nobody outside the room truly understood. Maul and Savage Opress had not simply arrived on the planet and declared themselves rulers. Maul had done something far more intelligent. He had assembled the Shadow Collective from the Pike Syndicate, Black Sun, the Hutt Clan, and Death Watch, then used those criminal forces to create a crisis that Death Watch could publicly solve. The people of Sundari saw gangsters rampaging through their capital, and then watched Vizsla's armored warriors defeat them. The performance made Death Watch look like saviors. Duchess Satine Kryze was arrested, her government collapsed, and Vizsla was elevated as Mandalore's new leader. Maul had supplied the machinery of the coup, but Vizsla believed that once the job was finished, he could discard the former Sith and keep the throne for himself. He imprisoned Maul and Savage, intending to send them away or kill them, and in doing so made the mistake that would destroy him in the original timeline. Maul escaped his cell, confronted Vizsla in front of his own warriors, and invoked a rule Death Watch respected more deeply than politics. He challenged Vizsla in single combat. The duel was brutal because Vizsla was not a ceremonial fighter hiding behind his title. He used the Darksaber, blasters, flamethrowers, explosives, a jetpack, and every Mandalorian advantage he possessed, while Maul deliberately fought without relying on Savage to overwhelm him. Eventually, Maul won. In canon, he disarmed Vizsla, took the Darksaber, and beheaded him. Many of the assembled warriors accepted the result because, according to their code, Maul had defeated their leader and therefore earned the right to command. Bo-Katan refused. She would not accept an outsider, especially a former Sith, as the ruler of Mandalore, and her refusal split Death Watch in two. That fracture became the foundation for everything that followed: Maul's occupation, Satine's death, Obi-Wan's rescue, the Civil War, Bo-Katan's alliance with Ahsoka, and finally the Siege of Mandalore. Our alternate timeline changes only a few seconds inside that throne room, but those seconds have to change in a believable way. Bo-Katan cannot simply shoot Maul in the back at the beginning of the duel, and then expect every warrior present to kneel to her. The same martial culture that later accepted Maul would see that as cowardice, and Death Watch would fracture even faster. So the most plausible moment comes at the end. Vizsla has already been beaten, his helmet is damaged, his weapons have been stripped away, and Maul stands over him with the Darksaber ready to deliver the killing stroke. Bo-Katan has watched the entire fight, and she understands something Vizsla failed to understand until it was too late. If Maul completes this execution, he is not merely killing her commander. He is using Mandalorian tradition to convert an alien criminal alliance into lawful-looking political authority. Once Vizsla's head falls, every warrior who believes in the ancient code will have an excuse to follow Maul. In this version, Bo-Katan acts before that final strike lands. She does not fire from across the room and hope for the best. She ignites her jetpack, slams into Maul as the Darksaber rises, and knocks him away from Vizsla before the execution can be completed. The throne room erupts. For a moment, nobody knows whether Bo-Katan has committed an unforgivable violation of the duel or prevented a foreign usurper from abusing Mandalorian law. Savage Opress answers the question by reaching for his weapon and charging into the Night Owls. That is the instant the ritual duel stops being a duel and becomes a battle. Bo-Katan's warriors open fire on Savage. Maul throws them across the chamber with the Force, and Vizsla, mortally wounded from the fight, tries to rise. He cannot. Maul has already defeated him physically, but he has not yet performed the execution that would make his victory unmistakable to the room. This is where Bo-Katan gets the chance she never had in canon. Maul is extraordinarily dangerous, but he is not invincible. He has just fought one of the best Mandalorian warriors alive. He is surrounded by armed soldiers in a confined chamber, and he is still operating with the arrogance of a man who believes everyone present must eventually submit to his strength. Bo-Katan knows the room. Her night owls know each other's movements. They do not try to duel Maul one at a time. They attack like Mandalorians fighting a Force user. Cables to restrict movement, rockets to break concentration, crossfire from multiple elevations, flamethrowers to deny space, and explosives used not to kill him immediately, but to force him where they want him. Savage tears through several warriors and nearly reaches his brother, but the moment he openly intervenes on Maul's behalf, destroys any remaining argument that Maul's claim is protected by honorable single combat. Vizsla sees what is happening and, in the final conscious act of his life, makes a decision that changes Mandalorian history. Rather than allow Maul to reclaim the Darksaber, he kicks or throws the weapon toward Bo-Katan. It is not a graceful coronation. There is no speech, no formal transfer of authority, and no guarantee that every clan will accept what follows. It is simply a dying commander choosing a Mandalorian successor over the outsider who defeated him. Bo catches the blade, activates it, and joins the attack. Maul parries her first strikes with his own saber, but he is no longer controlling the tempo of the fight. A cable catches his mechanical leg. A gauntlet rocket detonates against the floor beside him. He tears one night owl from the air with the Force, only for another to strike from behind. Savage tries to break through and takes concentrated fire from the entire flank of the chamber. Maul's final mistake is the same one that defines so much of his life. He focuses on the person directly in front of him, because hatred narrows his world. He sees Bo-Katan holding the Darksaber that should have been his and attacks her with everything he has. She is driven backward, barely surviving, and for an instant, it looks as though the alternate timeline will collapse back into the original. Then Savage, wounded and enraged, charges through the crossfire to protect his brother. Bo-Katan uses the opening. She triggers her jetpack at point-blank range, slips past Maul's saber, and drives the Darksaber through him before he can recover. Maul falls not to a greater Force user, but to the kind of coordinated betrayal and battlefield opportunism he himself has used against others his entire life. Savage does not surrender. He attacks with the fury that made him such a devastating weapon for Mother Talzin and later for Maul. But without Maul directing him, and with every surviving Death Watch warrior now understanding that the two brothers are fighting against Mandalore, rather than participating in a legitimate challenge, Savage is overwhelmed. Bo-Katan need not personally land every blow for the outcome to belong to her. She orders the chamber sealed, concentrates heavy weapons on him, and when Savage finally breaks through the last line, she finishes him with the Darksaber as well. Within minutes, both brothers are dead. The throne room is scorched, Vizsla is dying, and Death Watch has lost the man who led its rebellion. Yet Maul has also been denied the one thing he needed more than military victory: recognition. That distinction matters enormously. In the original timeline, Maul wins because he understands Mandalorian culture well enough to weaponize it. He does not need every warrior to love him. He needs enough of them to believe that killing Vizsla made him the rightful leader. Gar Saxon and Rook Kast accept his rule. Bo-Katan and her night owls refuse, and Mandalore descends into civil war. Here, Maul never gets the clean symbolic victory that produces that split. Vizsla is defeated but not executed by Maul. Savage contaminates the ritual by joining the fight, and Vizsla's last gesture places the Darksaber in Bo-Katan's hands. Some warriors would still accuse her of violating the old ways. Death Watch has never been a movement known for philosophical consistency, but most of them have spent years fighting to restore Mandalorian rule, not to become soldiers for a Zabrak crime lord. With Maul dead and the criminal syndicates already beginning to calculate their exits, Bo-Katan suddenly becomes the only leader in the room who can keep their victory from collapsing. Pre-Vizsla dies from his wounds shortly afterward. His death is still the end of an era, but it is not the beginning of Maul's reign. Bo-Katan takes the Darksaber, not because she has defeated Vizsla in formal combat, but because he placed it in her hands, and because nobody else has the combination of lineage, battlefield credibility, and command over the Night Owls necessary to challenge her immediately. That produces the first great irony of this timeline. Bo-Katan saves Mandalore from Maul, but in doing so she inherits the coup Maul helped create. Satine is already a prisoner. The new Mandalorian government has already been overthrown. The population has already been manipulated by staged criminal attacks. Bo has prevented a Sith-controlled occupation, but she has not restored democracy, neutrality, or her sister's rule. She has saved Mandalore from one kind of tyranny at the exact moment she becomes responsible for another. Her first problem is the Shadow Collective. The Pikes, Black Sun, and the Hutts did not swear eternal loyalty to Mandalore. Their relationship with Maul was based on coercion, fear, and profit. With Maul and Savage dead, the alliance immediately becomes unstable. Some leaders would simply flee. Others would demand payment for services already rendered. A few might see Mandalore's political chaos as an opportunity to seize assets or take hostages. Bo-Katan cannot control them the way Maul did because she lacks the Force, and she does not have the personal terror that allowed Maul to walk into a criminal stronghold and make obedience feel like the safest choice. Her first act as leader, therefore, cannot be a triumphant speech to the people. It has to be a military operation against the very criminals Death Watch invited onto the board. This is where a united Death Watch becomes possible. Bo-Katan gives its warriors a new enemy immediately. Instead of fighting each other over whether Maul should rule, they are ordered to expel every Shadow Collective force still operating on Mandalore. Gar Saxon, Rook Kast, and other commanders who might have followed Maul in canon now face a different choice. There is no living Maul to reward their loyalty, no claim established by Vizsla's execution, and no reason to abandon Mandalore for an outsider who has already died. Bo-Katan offers them continuity. The coup still stands, the warrior restoration still stands, and Vizsla's enemies can still be defeated. The price is acknowledging her command. For ambitious figures like Saxon, that is not necessarily permanent loyalty, but it is enough for the moment. The fighting that follows is shorter than the canon civil war, but still violent. Pike soldiers try to secure escape routes. Black Sun operatives attempt to preserve weapons caches and credits. Hutt representatives retreat behind hired guards. Mandalorian commandos sweep Sundari's docks, communication hubs, and government facilities, cutting criminal forces away from one another. Because the syndicates had been instructed to play the role of defeated invaders during the staged coup, much of their strength was never intended to hold the capital against Death Watch indefinitely. Once Maul is gone, the illusion becomes reality. Death Watch expels them, seizes supplies, and captures enough equipment to make the new regime materially stronger than Vizsla expected it would be when he first plotted with Maul. And that creates the second great irony. By killing Maul, Bo-Katan destroys the Shadow Collective as a unified political machine, but she inherits some of its resources. Weapons, credits, encrypted communications, smuggling contacts, and captured ships do not disappear simply because their architect is dead. Bo is too practical to burn everything associated with Maul. She uses what can help Mandalore, and cuts loose what cannot be trusted. The Pikes retreat to their spice operations. Black Sun reconstitutes elsewhere. The Hutts return to their own territories, furious but alive. The galaxy's criminal underworld does not become Maul's empire, and years later, there is no Maul sitting above Crimson Dawn as the secret power behind Dryden Voss. But on Mandalore, the immediate effect is paradoxically stabilizing. Death Watch has a common victory, a common enemy, and a new leader holding the Darksaber. That does not mean Bo-Katan instantly becomes beloved. The civilian population of Sundari did not ask to exchange Satine's pacifist government for military rule. Many supported Vizsla only because Death Watch had manufactured a crisis and then presented itself as the solution. Once the criminal attacks stop, people begin asking uncomfortable questions. Who invited these syndicates into the capital? Why did the violence erupt so conveniently before Death Watch seized power? Why has one unelected ruler simply been replaced by another? Maul's death prevents him from installing Almec as a puppet in quite the same way, but it does not erase the underlying legitimacy problem. Bo-Katan therefore faces a challenge Maul never truly cared about. She has to rule Mandalorians rather than merely possess Mandalore. Her answer would almost certainly be martial nationalism. Bo-Katan is not Satine. At this point in her life, she is a committed member of Death Watch who has participated in violent attempts to overthrow her sister's government. She believes Mandalore has been weakened by abandoning its warrior identity. Killing Maul does not suddenly transform her into the more mature leader seen years later. She would restore weapons training, elevate warrior clans, place Deathwatch officers throughout the security apparatus, and dismantle many of the restrictions Satine's government placed on militarism. The Darksaber would become the visual centerpiece of the new regime, a declaration that Mandalore's ancient traditions had returned. But Bo-Katan is also not Maul. She has no reason to turn Sundari into the capital of a galactic criminal empire. She does not want Mandalore to be ruled from Dathomir, Coruscant, Sereno, or Nal Hutta. Her nationalism is precisely why she rejected Maul in canon. That means the new government would be harsh, militarized, and born from a coup, but it would also be genuinely Mandalorian in its priorities. Bo's goal would be sovereignty, not Sith domination. That difference is what allows Deathwatch to remain far more unified than it did in the original timeline. The argument is no longer whether an outsider has the right to rule. The argument becomes what kind of Mandalore Bo-Katan intends to build. And standing at the center of that argument is Duchess Satine Kryze, still alive in a prison cell. Bo-Katan's relationship with Satine is one of the reasons this alternate timeline becomes much more interesting than a simple version where killing Maul automatically saves everyone. Bo did oppose her sister. She joined Deathwatch knowing exactly what it wanted. She helped a movement that used terrorism, intimidation, and military force to destroy the pacifist order Satine spent years building after Mandalore's civil wars. Yet canon also makes it clear that Bo's opposition to Satine was political, ideological, and deeply personal rather than a desire to watch her sister suffer. When Maul murdered Satine in front of Obi-Wan, Bo was horrified. Her later actions are shaped by that loss. She may have believed Satine was wrong for Mandalore, but that is very different from believing Satine deserved to be killed. So after Maul's death, Satine is not dragged into the throne room for an execution. Bo-Katan visits her privately. It is probably the most difficult conversation either sister has ever had. Satine sees Bo carrying the Darksaber and understands immediately what has happened. Vizsla is dead. Maul is gone. Deathwatch controls the capital. Her own sister now stands at the top of a revolution that has destroyed everything she spent her life trying to protect. Bo, meanwhile, has to look at the woman whose government she helped overthrow and explain that she has also just prevented Mandalore from falling under the rule of a Sith-trained warlord. Neither can claim moral victory. Satine would not congratulate her. She would tell Bo that this is exactly where the worship of violence leads. Deathwatch wanted strength, so it allied with Dooku. When Dooku proved inconvenient, it broke with him. Then it allied with Maul because he offered another path to power. Now Vizsla is dead, Sundari has been terrorized, criminal syndicates have been invited into Mandalorian space, and Bo holds a legendary weapon as though possession of it can erase the blood spilled to obtain the throne. Satine would see Maul not as an outside corruption of Deathwatch's plan, but as the natural result of it. Once political authority is reduced to whoever can impose more force, someone more dangerous will eventually arrive. Bo-Katan would reject that judgment, but not because she can completely dismiss it. From her perspective, Satine's pacifism also failed. Mandalore remained officially neutral, yet it was infiltrated by smugglers, pressured by both sides of the Clone Wars, economically strained, and unable to inspire the warrior clans that still remembered an older identity. Bo would argue that the galaxy Satine hoped to stay outside has become too violent for neutrality to protect anyone. The Republic is militarizing. The Separatists are expanding. Sith Lords and crime syndicates can reach Mandalore whenever they wish. If Mandalore refuses to defend itself because it fears its own history, someone else will decide its future. Neither sister persuades the other. That is important. Bo-Katan does not suddenly embrace pacifism, and Satine does not suddenly decide Deathwatch was right because Maul was worse. What changes is the outcome of their conflict. In canon, Maul ends the argument permanently by killing Satine. Here, Bo has to live with her sister. She has to decide whether her revolution can tolerate the continued existence of the person who represents everything it overthrew. Execution is the least likely choice. Bo-Katan is ruthless, but murdering Satine after already seizing the government would destroy any claim that her actions were about Mandalorian survival rather than personal ambition. It would also risk turning Satine into a martyr for the new Mandalorians and the Council of Neutral Systems. Keeping her in a public prison is almost as dangerous. Every protest could become a rescue attempt, every foreign diplomat could demand access, and every rumor about Satine's treatment could undermine the new regime. The most plausible outcome is controlled exile after a short period of detention. Bo strips Satine of official authority, forces her to renounce any immediate attempt to reclaim the throne, and sends her away from Sundari under guard. Where Satine goes matters less than what her survival means. She could take refuge with a sympathetic neutral system. She could be placed on another Mandalorian world under surveillance. She might even be permitted to live quietly on Kalevala, away from the capital, provided she does not organize an armed restoration. Whatever the location, Bo has removed Satine from power without becoming the sister who murdered her. That one decision transforms Obi-Wan Kenobi's story. In the original timeline, Obi-Wan responds to Satine's distress call alone because the Republic cannot officially intervene in Mandalore's internal conflict. He infiltrates the prison, attempts to rescue her, is captured, and then is forced to watch Maul kill Satine specifically to make him suffer. It is one of the cruelest things Maul ever does because it has almost nothing to do with political necessity. Satine's death is a weapon aimed at Obi-Wan. Maul wants to reproduce the pain he associates with his own suffering, and he knows that Satine is one of the few people capable of reaching beneath Obi-Wan's Jedi composure. None of that happens here. There is no Maul ruling Mandalore, and no Maul waiting to lure Kenobi into a personal trap. If Satine is able to send a message before her exile, Obi-Wan learns that she has been deposed and that Bo-Katan now controls Mandalore. He would still be deeply affected. Satine represents a life he once considered choosing over the Jedi Order. Losing her government, watching her ideals collapse, and knowing that her own sister helped bring it about would hurt him. But grief over a living person's defeat is not the same wound as holding Satine while she dies because Maul wanted to punish him. The Jedi Council's response would remain cautious. Mandalore is neutral territory, and the Republic cannot simply invade because Death Watch has overthrown a government it dislikes. Satine's status as leader of the Council of Neutral Systems complicates diplomacy, but the Republic is already fighting a galactic war. If Bo-Katan presents the coup as an internal Mandalorian transfer of power and immediately expels the criminal syndicates, Palpatine has every reason to argue publicly that the Republic should not open another front. He can condemn the violence, call for negotiations, and quietly enjoy the fact that Mandalore's neutrality block has just been decapitated without the Republic firing a shot. Obi-Wan might ask permission to investigate, but the Council would know how personally involved he is. Yoda and Mace Windu would be wary of sending him into a situation involving Satine and Death Watch unless there were clear evidence of separatist control. The irony is that this restraint protects Obi-Wan emotionally. He does not have to fight through Sundari, fail to save Satine, and leave Mandalore carrying the memory of her death. He continues the war with sadness, concern, and perhaps even guilt, but not the specific trauma Maul engineered in canon. That emotional resilience matters later, though not in the simplistic sense that one saved relationship automatically prevents the fall of the Jedi. Obi-Wan is already one of the most disciplined Jedi of his generation. Satine's death does not cause him to become reckless or unstable in canon. He continues to function, continues to lead, and ultimately survives Order 66. So we should not pretend that Satine living turns Obi-Wan into an entirely different man. The difference is subtler. He carries one less wound, he has one less proof that everyone he loves will be taken from him. And in the final months of the war, when his relationship with Anakin becomes more strained, that small reserve of emotional strength could matter. There is also a possibility that Satine's survival creates an indirect line of communication between Obi-Wan and Mandalore. Even in exile, she would remain a politically important figure. Obi-Wan might contact her discreetly, not to plan a restoration by force, but to understand what Bo-Katan is doing. Satine could become one of the few outside observers warning the Jedi that Mandalore is rearming rapidly. She could also tell Obi-Wan something he does not want to hear. Bo is not Maul, and the new regime may genuinely command enough Mandalorian support that removing it would require another civil war. The Jedi are already being consumed by the Clone Wars. Satine, despite being the victim of the coup, might be the person most determined to stop them from launching another invasion in her name. Bo-Katan, meanwhile, has to consolidate power beyond Sundari. The Darksaber helps, but it is not a magical crown that forces every clan to obey. Mandalorian identity has always been contested. Some clans support the new Mandalorian movement. Some sympathize with Death Watch. Others care more about family, territory, or survival than ideology. Bo would spend months traveling, negotiating, threatening, and occasionally fighting to turn Death Watch's coup into a durable state. Her possession of the Darksaber gives her a powerful symbol, especially among traditionalists, but her claim remains unusual because she did not win it from Vizsla in formal combat. That ambiguity never fully disappears. She compensates by making victory itself her legitimacy. Maul and Savage are dead. The criminal syndicates are gone. The capital is secure. Mandalore is rearming. Bo can point to every one of those facts and ask what rival has done more. If a clan leader challenges her, she can accept the challenge and defeat them publicly, gradually building the kind of warrior authority that could not be granted in a single ceremony. Over time, the story of the throne room changes in the telling. What began as Bo interrupting a duel becomes the legend of Bo-Katan, preventing a foreign dark warrior from stealing Mandalore. Details unfavorable to her disappear. Vizsla's final transfer of the Darksaber becomes more formal in memory than it really was. Revolutions are often followed by stories explaining why the people who won were always meant to. The government that emerges would probably be a hybrid between Death Watch command and traditional clan politics. Bo knows that simply placing armored soldiers on every street would invite endless resistance. She needs civilian administrators, supply systems, engineers, medical services, and trade. Many officials from Satine's government would therefore remain in place if they swear loyalty, even while the political leadership changes. Almec is particularly interesting. In canon, Maul frees him and later uses him as the public prime minister of occupied Mandalore. In this timeline, Bo has less reason to trust him. Almec is corrupt, opportunistic, and already compromised. She might still use his administrative experience temporarily, but he is exactly the kind of politician who could become a rival or foreign asset. A military council under Bo's direct control is more likely than allowing Almec to become the unquestioned civilian face of the new order. The economic problem is harder. Satine's neutrality was tied to trade relationships across the Council of Neutral Systems. Death Watch's violent takeover frightens those partners. Some refuse to recognize Bo-Katan, others impose restrictions. Mandalore cannot live on warrior pride alone. It needs food, fuel, medicine, spare parts, and commercial access. That pushes Bo toward the same strategic question that confronted Vizsla years earlier. Does Mandalore survive by aligning with one side of the Clone Wars, or by remaining independent from both? At first glance, joining the Separatists seems possible because Death Watch once worked with Count Dooku, but that alliance ended badly. Dooku backed Vizsla when Death Watch was useful, then abandoned the movement when the political situation changed. Vizsla later openly hated him. Bo-Katan would remember that. More importantly, she has just killed 2 dark side warriors who used an alliance to gain leverage over Mandalore. Handing Dooku a formal military presence immediately afterward would look like repeating the same mistake. Bo's entire claim to legitimacy rests on the idea that Mandalore will no longer be controlled by outsiders, so the most likely path is not full Separatist membership, it is armed neutrality. Bo tells both the Republic and the Confederacy that Mandalore will trade where it chooses, defend its own territory, and permit no foreign garrison. She reinterprets Satine's neutrality in a way her sister would hate. Not neutrality through pacifism, but neutrality through deterrence. Mandalore will stand outside the war because invading it will be too expensive. That policy turns the system into a genuine third power, though not one remotely equal to the Republic or the Separatists in raw scale. Mandalore does not have millions of clone troopers or endless droid foundries. What it has is a warrior culture, advanced armor, highly mobile commandos, strong defensive technology, and a strategic reputation that makes larger powers think twice. Bo expands training, recalls exiles willing to swear loyalty, fortifies hyperspace approaches, and turns Concordia and other holdings into military nodes. Every captured Shadow Collective ship is inspected and repurposed. Every old Death Watch cache becomes part of a national arsenal. The Beskar question becomes central. Mandalorian armor is one of the culture's great advantages, but Beskar is not an infinite resource that can simply be issued to every soldier overnight. Bo would prioritize elite units, commanders, and clan warriors who already possess ancestral armor. More conventional troops would use standard Mandalorian equipment. The regime's military strength comes less from making everyone invulnerable, and more from doctrine, jetpack mobility, dispersed cells, urban familiarity, anti-armor weapons, and a population with deeper martial training than the pacifist government allowed. Dooku would probe this new Mandalore immediately. He cannot ignore a heavily armed neutral state positioned in the middle of a galactic war, especially one led by people who once worked with him and now despise him. He might send envoys offering recognition, weapons, or favorable trade in exchange for basing rights. Bo would listen, because refusing to listen is poor strategy, but she would not forget that Dooku considered Deathwatch expendable. She would use the negotiations to make Coruscant nervous, then use Republic concern to extract concessions of her own. The point would be to make both sides believe that pushing too hard could drive Mandalore into the other camp. Palpatine would understand the game better than anyone. Publicly, Chancellor Palpatine could present himself as the defender of Mandalorian sovereignty. He could say the Republic regrets Satine's removal, but respects the principle that neutral systems should not be forced into the war. Privately, Darth Sidious would see Bo-Katan's Mandalore as a problem to be postponed, not solved immediately. He does not need to conquer every independent world before Order 66. He needs the Republic and Separatists exhausted, the Jedi compromised, Anakin isolated, and the clone army positioned to destroy its generals. Mandalore can wait. In fact, Maul's death makes Sidious's life easier in several important ways. In canon, Sidious traveled personally to Mandalore because Maul had become too dangerous to ignore. He killed Savage, defeated Maul, and kept Maul alive because he still had uses for him. That confrontation was not a public campaign, but it was evidence that Maul had become a genuine wildcard in the Sith plan. Here, Sidious never needs to leave Coruscant for that purpose. He senses Maul's death through the Force, or learns of it through intelligence channels, and recognizes that a loose end has removed itself. There would be no grief. Sidious never viewed Maul as a son. At most there would be irritation that a former apprentice had died outside his control, and curiosity about how Bo-Katan accomplished it. Then calculation would take over. Savage is dead. Maul is dead. Mother Talzin has lost two of the most important pieces she could use against him. The Shadow Collective is fragmenting. Mandalore is ruled by a conventional political actor, rather than a Force-sensitive enemy who knows Sidious personally. From the perspective of the Grand Plan, this is an improvement. Dooku might even suggest exploiting Bo-Katan or assassinating her, but Sidious would likely counsel patience. A militarized Mandalore can be useful while the Clone Wars continue. It gives the Republic Senate another security threat to debate. It weakens the Council of Neutral Systems. It creates demand for continued military spending. And if Bo remains outside both major alliances, she can later be labeled a separatist, terrorist, extremist, or insurgent depending on what the new empire needs. Sidious does not have to defeat Mandalore today if he can arrange the galaxy so that tomorrow nobody will be able to object when he does. This is the essential difference between Bo-Katan's victory and a true defeat of Sidious. Killing Maul removes one Sith-trained predator from Mandalore, but it does nothing to reveal the Sith Lord sitting at the center of the Republic. Bo does not know Palpatine's identity. She does not know about Order 66. She does not know the full purpose of the clone army. Without Maul alive to obsess over Sidious, and eventually understand that the war is moving toward a final trap, Mandalore may actually become less connected to the truth behind the Clone Wars. And that hidden advantage for Palpatine becomes more important as the war continues. The next year of the Clone Wars would look strangely familiar from Coruscant. Many of the war's major campaigns still happen because Maul was never responsible for them in the first place. The Separatist Alliance still controls enormous territory. Grievous still commands droid armies. Dooku still answers to Sidious. The Jedi still become increasingly trapped in military roles. Ahsoka is still framed for the bombing of the Jedi Temple, because Barriss Offee's disillusionment grows out of the war and the Jedi Order, not out of anything Maul does on Mandalore. 5 still uncovers the inhibitor chip conspiracy, and dies trying to warn Anakin and Rex. The Jedi still learn that Tyrannus is Dooku, and that the clone army was created through a conspiracy they do not fully understand. Sidious's greatest achievements remain intact. That continuity is important because killing Maul does not magically solve the Clone Wars. It removes one major branch of chaos while leaving the central Sith conspiracy untouched. If anything, the galaxy appears slightly easier to understand. Mandalore has undergone a violent nationalist coup, but it is no longer the headquarters of a dark-side crime lord. The Pikes and Black Sun return to being criminal organizations rather than components of Maul's geopolitical machine. There is no rogue Sith apprentice openly building his own power base. The Jedi can categorize Mandalore as a political crisis and focus on Dooku and Grievous. Ahsoka Tano's personal story therefore continues almost exactly as it did until after she leaves the Jedi Order. She is still accused. Anakin still believes in her innocence. The Council still expels her, so that she can face Republic justice. Barriss is still exposed, and the Jedi still offer Ahsoka the chance to return. She refuses. That departure remains one of the most damaging events in Anakin's life, because it confirms his growing belief that the institutions he is supposed to trust can fail the people closest to him. Maul's death does not save Ahsoka from that experience. What changes is what happens afterward. In canon, Ahsoka eventually descends into Coruscant's lower levels, meets Trace and Rafa Martez, becomes entangled with the Pike Syndicate, and during that adventure is noticed by Bo-Katan's Night Owls, who are tracking Maul's criminal connections. That encounter is the bridge to the Siege of Mandalore. Bo-Katan approaches Ahsoka because Maul is their common enemy. Ahsoka has history with him, Bo has lost Mandalore to him, and together they create the unlikely alliance that eventually brings Ahsoka back to Anakin and Obi-Wan. In this timeline, that bridge does not exist. Ahsoka can still meet Trace and Rafa. She can still become involved with the Pikes because the Pikes continue to operate as a criminal syndicate after Maul's death. But Bo-Katan has no reason to be covertly tracking Maul through Pike territory. She already killed him. Her Night Owls are not exiled insurgents searching for a way to reclaim Mandalore. They are part of Mandalore's ruling military establishment. Even if Mandalorian intelligence keeps an eye on the Pikes, Bo-Katan herself is far more likely to be in Sundari managing a government than personally stalking criminals through the underworld. So Ahsoka completes her adventure with the Martez sisters and returns to Coruscant without meeting Bo-Katan. There is no conversation about a common enemy. There is no urgent request to help capture Maul. There is no reason for Ahsoka to contact Anakin and Obi-Wan before the final phase of the war. She remains exactly what she chose to become when she walked down the steps of the Jedi Temple, a former Jedi trying to work out what her life looks like without the Order. This sounds like a small change compared with the conquest of Mandalore, but emotionally, it may be one of the most consequential. In canon, Ahsoka's return gives Anakin one last moment in which his older life briefly comes back together. He sees his former Padawan. Rex sees his former commander. The 501st paint their helmets in her colors. Anakin gives Ahsoka back her lightsabers, modified so that their blades are now blue. The reunion is awkward because the wounds between Ahsoka and the Jedi are not healed, but the affection is obvious. Anakin gets to see that Ahsoka survived leaving him. He gets to help her one more time. Then they separate, believing they will see each other again. Without Maul, that entire farewell disappears. Ahsoka does not arrive while Anakin and Obi-Wan are fighting on Yerbana. Anakin never presents the blue-bladed sabers. Rex never leads a group of clones wearing Ahsoka-inspired markings. Bo-Katan never asks for Republic assistance because there is no hostile Maul regime for her to overthrow. There is no military question for Obi-Wan and Ahsoka to argue about, and no compromise in which part of the 501st is detached under Rex, while Anakin and Obi-Wan answer the emergency at Coruscant. This is where we have to correct one idea that is easy to misremember. The Siege of Mandalore did not physically prevent Anakin and Obi-Wan from being on Coruscant during the crucial opening of Revenge of the Sith. In canon, the attack on Coruscant is reported while they are with Ahsoka and Bo-Katan, and Anakin and Obi-Wan immediately leave to rescue Chancellor Palpatine. They still fight through the Invisible Hand, confront Dooku, save the Chancellor, and return to Coruscant. Removing the siege does not suddenly place them somewhere they were absent from before. What it changes is the people and forces around them, and the emotional context in which Anakin enters the final days of the Republic. The full 501st is no longer being divided for an unofficial Mandalorian intervention. Rex does not become commander of a special force serving under Ahsoka. The unit commonly called the 302nd, marked by the orange and white helmet designs honoring Ahsoka, is never created in that form. Those clones remain available to Anakin's command structure. Whether every one of them personally fights during the Battle of Coruscant is a tactical detail we cannot know, but the important point is that they are not on Mandalore, and later aboard a Venator with Ahsoka when Order 66 is given. Rex's fate becomes dramatically worse because of that. Fives still warned him. Rex still has doubts buried somewhere beneath his loyalty and conditioning. But in canon, those doubts only save him because Ahsoka is present when the Order activates. Rex fights the chip for a few precious seconds, mentions Fives, and gives Ahsoka enough of a clue to investigate. She captures him, removes the chip, and restores his free will. Without the Siege of Mandalore, there is no reason for Ahsoka and Rex to be together when Order 66 arrives. Rex is simply another clone officer serving the Republic, and when Sidious issues the command, the inhibitor chip takes control. That means Bo-Katan killing Maul years earlier could indirectly condemn Rex to become an Imperial soldier. It is one of the darkest unintended consequences in the entire scenario. Bo saves her planet from Maul. She saves Satine's life. Yet because there is no later crisis to reunite Ahsoka and Rex, the circumstance that frees Rex from Order 66 never occurs. He may carry out the command against whatever Jedi are near him, then continue serving the new Empire until the clones are phased out, or until some later event finally makes him question what happened. Wolf and Gregor's futures become uncertain as well, because the exact process by which their chips were eventually removed is not shown in the same detail as Rex's, and Rex can no longer be assumed to become the same independent veteran who later lives with them on Selos. Ahsoka's situation during Order 66 is almost the reverse. She loses the protection of Rex, but she also loses the death trap of the Tribunal. In canon, she is trapped inside a warship full of clones who have been ordered to kill her, with no easy way to escape, and with Maul loose aboard the vessel. She survives because she is exceptionally skilled, because Rex gives her the clue about Fives, because droids help her, and because she refuses to abandon Rex. In this timeline, she is more likely somewhere on Coruscant or moving through the underworld with no official military assignment. She no longer has her returned lightsabers, which is a serious disadvantage, but she also is not surrounded by an entire clone company at the moment the order is transmitted. Would Order 66 still target her? Almost certainly once Imperial security identifies her. Rex and the 302nd treated Ahsoka as a target in canon, despite her having left the Order, and Sidious clearly regarded her as someone to be eliminated. But Coruscant's lower levels are enormous, chaotic, and filled with people who avoid official attention for a living. Trace and Rafa know how to move through that world. Ahsoka knows how to hide her Force abilities when necessary. Her first warning may be the same immense disturbance in the Force that tells surviving Jedi something catastrophic has happened. Instead of deflecting blaster bolts on a cruiser, she might watch clone patrols seal transit routes and realize that the safest thing she can do is disappear. This could actually make Ahsoka's immediate survival more likely, although it would leave her far more isolated. She would not know that Rex had been freed. She might assume he died with the rest of the Republic she knew, or worse, eventually learn that he remained an Imperial officer. She would not possess Maul's warnings about Sidious's plan, because she never confronted Maul on Mandalore. She would have fewer pieces of the puzzle when the Republic becomes the Empire overnight. Her later decision to help Bail Organa and build resistance could still happen, but the path there would be lonelier and less informed. Anakin enters the same period with a different emotional balance. He does not have to worry about Ahsoka fighting Maul on Mandalore because she is not there. He does not receive updates about a dangerous former Sith being captured. He does not have the final conversation in which Ahsoka tells him good luck before he races back toward Coruscant. That might sound like one less source of anxiety, but it is also one less source of connection. The canon reunion reminds Anakin that Ahsoka still cares about him despite leaving the Order. Without it, the last major memory he has of her is still the day she refused to return to the Jedi and walked away. Palpatine can use that absence even if he never mentions Ahsoka directly. Anakin is already feeling excluded from the Council, frightened by visions of Padme's death, frustrated by Jedi secrecy, and emotionally dependent on the Chancellor's approval. The warm shock of seeing Ahsoka again does not undo those problems in canon, but it briefly reconnects him to someone who knew him before his final isolation. Removing that moment does not save Anakin. If anything, it makes Palpatine's emotional environment marginally cleaner. There is one counterweight: Obi-Wan has not watched Satine die. He reaches the end of the war without Maul having inflicted that specific trauma, and Satine may still be alive somewhere beyond Mandalore. That gives Obi-Wan a little more emotional stability, and perhaps a little more willingness to speak openly with Anakin about attachment. Their relationship in Revenge of the Sith is affectionate but strained by duty, secrecy, and the Council's demands. A version of Obi-Wan, who has been forced to confront the fact that Satine survived despite losing everything, might be more reflective about the difference between attachment and possession. He may recognize more clearly that Anakin's emotional life cannot be solved by pretending it does not exist. But timing works against him. Palpatine's final manipulation of Anakin happens quickly. After the Battle of Coruscant, Anakin learns Padme is pregnant. He begins dreaming of her death. The Council asks him to spy on Palpatine. Obi-Wan is sent to Utapau to kill Grievous. Anakin remains in the capital. Even a slightly more emotionally resilient Obi-Wan cannot help if he does not know the full truth about Padme or the Chancellor's promises. Satine's survival changes Obi-Wan more than it changes the institutional failures surrounding Anakin. If anything, Sidious's plan unfolds with fewer external disruptions. There is no Maul on Mandalore sensing the shape of the coming catastrophe. There is no Maul telling Ahsoka that Sidious is about to take control of the galaxy, or insisting that Anakin has been groomed as the key to everything. In canon, Ahsoka refuses Maul's proposed alliance because she cannot believe Anakin would fall, but the warning exists. Here, nobody delivers it. There is no captured Maul being transported toward Coruscant while the Jedi move against Palpatine. There is no rogue former Sith shouting pieces of the truth from the margins. Sidious also never had to personally subdue Maul and Savage earlier in the war. That does not dramatically alter his schedule. His confrontation with them was secret and brief. But symbolically, it means his largest uncontrolled dark side rival disappears without requiring his intervention. Mother Talzin remains a possible problem, and her exact future could diverge because the later chain of events involving Maul cannot occur in the same way. But Talzin is not embedded inside the Republic or commanding Mandalore. Sidious can deal with Dathomir through Dooku and Grievous when necessary. His central plan remains protected. Meanwhile, Bo-Katan looks at the final months of the Clone Wars and believes her gamble worked. Mandalore is armed. Neither side has invaded. Satine's neutral coalition has weakened, but the planet itself is sovereign. Death Watch has transformed from an underground insurgency into a national military. Clan leaders who once dismissed Bo as Vizsla's lieutenant now attend councils where she sits beneath the Darksaber. Every month that passes without Republic occupation appears to vindicate her belief that strength protected Mandalore better than pacifism did. That confidence is exactly what makes the arrival of the Empire so devastating. Order 66 changes Mandalore before a single Imperial transport lands. The event is initially confusing from the outside because Palpatine does not announce that he has become a Sith Lord who has destroyed the Jedi. He announces that the Jedi attempted to overthrow the Republic, that their rebellion has been defeated, and that the Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society. To worlds exhausted by war, the speech is framed as restoration. To Bo-Katan, it sounds like the birth of exactly the kind of central power Mandalore has spent years trying to avoid. Her first concern would be whether the new Empire considers Mandalore neutral. The answer becomes obvious almost immediately. The Empire does not really believe in meaningful neutrality. Sidious tolerated neutral systems during the Clone Wars because their existence served the political architecture of the conflict. Once the war is over, and the Senate has surrendered extraordinary authority to the Emperor, independent military powers become liabilities. A heavily armed Mandalore led by former Death Watch insurgents is not something Palpatine intends to leave alone indefinitely. Bo would receive demands wrapped in diplomatic language. Imperial representatives might ask Mandalore to recognize the new government, share intelligence on separatist fugitives, permit inspections, accept standardized trade controls, and coordinate its defenses with Imperial Sector Command. Each request sounds manageable in isolation. Together they amount to surrendering sovereignty piece by piece. Bo-Katan understands this because she has spent her entire adult life watching outside powers use partnerships as entry points. She refuses the most intrusive demands. Perhaps she recognizes the Empire formally to avoid immediate war, because recognizing a government is not the same as obeying it. Perhaps she agrees to trade and anti-piracy cooperation, while rejecting any permanent Imperial garrison. She would almost certainly insist that Mandalorian security remain under Mandalorian command. The Darksaber on her belt makes the message clear. The Clone Wars are over, but Mandalore is not becoming someone else's province. Palpatine does not need to respond with a bombardment on the first day. His preferred weapon is control. He has a new Imperial Navy, a Senate that still exists as a useful facade, intelligence services expanding under his rule, and an enormous population conditioned to associate military authority with safety. He can isolate Mandalore politically before he attacks it physically. Trade routes are inspected, shipping licenses are delayed, merchants are warned that dealing with an uncooperative Mandalorian government may threaten Imperial contracts. Former members of Satine's neutral coalition are pressured to distance themselves from Bo-Katan. What had once been armed neutrality begins to look like encirclement. This creates an extraordinary reversal for Satine. She spent the Clone Wars arguing that militarization would make Mandalore less safe, not more. Bo overthrew her partly because she believed the opposite. Now the Empire is using Bo's very military buildup as evidence that Mandalore is dangerous. Satine can say, with painful accuracy, that the warrior state Bo built to deter invasion has given Palpatine the perfect justification to describe Mandalore as a threat. But Satine would also recognize that the galaxy has changed. The Republic she once appealed to no longer exists in meaningful form. The Senate cannot be trusted to defend neutral sovereignty. The Jedi are gone. The Emperor's forces do not behave like mediators who can be persuaded by constitutional argument. If Imperial troops come to impose direct rule, Satine cannot simply tell Bo to disarm and hope Palpatine respects the gesture. Her pacifism is tested by an opponent who treats submission as the starting point rather than the end of conflict. This could produce the first genuine reconciliation between the sisters. Not a complete one, and certainly not a simple embrace, in which years of betrayal are forgotten. Satine still condemns the coup. Bo still believes Satine's government left Mandalore vulnerable. Yet both now face an external regime that wants to erase the very autonomy they fought each other over. Satine has diplomatic credibility with former neutral systems. Bo has military power. For the first time, those strengths can complement each other instead of competing. Bo might quietly allow Satine to return from exile as an advisor while refusing to restore her title. Satine could contact senators such as Bail Organa or Mon Mothma, warning them that Imperial consolidation is moving beyond former separatist space and into systems that never joined the war. Those conversations would place Mandalore near the earliest political resistance to Palpatine. The irony is almost unbearable. Death Watch's former terrorist leader and the galaxy's most famous Mandalorian pacifist could end up on the same side, because the Empire leaves no room for either version of genuine independence. Palpatine would see that reconciliation as dangerous. A purely militarist Bo-Katan can be isolated as an extremist. A purely pacifist Satine can be dismissed as an obsolete idealist. Together they create a broader Mandalorian cause. Bo can rally the clans. Satine can appeal to civilians and sympathetic senators. The Darksaber can symbolize warrior legitimacy, while Satine's survival provides continuity with the government the outside galaxy once recognized. If Palpatine allows that coalition to mature, Mandalore could become a model for other systems resisting Imperial centralization. So he looks for internal fractures. Gar Saxon becomes crucial. In canon, Saxon serves Maul after Bo-Katan rejects Maul's rule, later becomes an Imperial viceroy, and governs Mandalore on behalf of the Empire. In this timeline, he never becomes one of Maul's super commandos because Maul dies before that faction solidifies. He initially remains inside Bo-Katan's United Death Watch. But the qualities that later make him useful to the Empire still exist. Ambition, ruthlessness, willingness to attach himself to power, and a belief that Mandalorian strength can be preserved through the right alliance. Imperial intelligence would identify Saxon quickly. Agents approach him with an argument tailored specifically to his worldview. Bo-Katan, they say, is becoming weak. She spared Satine. She is listening to pacifists. She is jeopardizing trade to protect an abstract idea of sovereignty. The Empire, by contrast, is the strongest military power the galaxy has ever seen. Mandalore can fight it and be destroyed, or join it and receive a privileged place within the New Order. Saxon does not need to think of himself as a traitor. He can convince himself that collaboration is the only way to preserve Mandalorian power. Bo-Katan would suspect something. She has watched enough alliances collapse to know how quickly loyalty changes when survival is at stake. But the unity created by Maul's death now becomes a weakness. Because Death Watch did not split years earlier, figures like Saxon have remained inside her government, rising through its military structure and learning its defenses. The civil war Bo avoided in Season 5 may simply have been postponed until the Empire has the ability to weaponize it. At the same time, Rex is undergoing his own tragedy. When Order 66 is issued, the inhibitor chip overrides the loyalty he developed toward the Jedi. If he is still attached to Anakin's forces or another Republic command, he turns against Jedi exactly as he did aboard the Tribunal, except there is no Ahsoka nearby to rescue him from himself. The most painful possibility is that Rex participates in the first Imperial operations without understanding that anything fundamental has been stolen from him. From his perspective, the Jedi betrayed the Republic. The Chancellor survived, the war ended. His duty continues. Whether Rex directly enters the Jedi Temple with the 501st is uncertain, and it would be wrong to claim that he definitely does. Canon assigns the Temple assault to Darth Vader and the 501st, but Rex's precise location in our altered deployment cannot be known. What we can say is that he is no longer safely removed from the Central Imperial transition by the Siege of Mandalore. He is available to the military machine at exactly the moment Palpatine converts it into the Imperial Army. That also means Rex could encounter Vader far earlier as Vader, rather than as Anakin. Imagine the psychological cruelty of that arrangement. The clone captain who served Anakin through years of war now receives orders from a black armored enforcer, without knowing at first who is beneath the mask. Vader knows Rex. He remembers Christophsis, Umbara, countless campaigns, and the bond between Rex and Ahsoka. Yet Vader's new identity depends on treating Anakin's relationships as dead. Palpatine could deliberately retain veteran 501st clones around him because familiarity makes them useful, while their inhibitor-conditioned obedience makes them controllable. If Vader eventually reveals himself through mannerisms, tactics, or direct command, Rex's chip does not prevent all thought. Canon shows that clones can display varying degrees of conflict around their programming. Rex fought the Order long enough to warn Ahsoka. The Bad Batch demonstrates that behavioral effects can differ. A Rex who spends months serving the Empire might begin noticing contradictions, especially as the official story about the Jedi fails to match the people he knew. But without Ahsoka to force the issue immediately, realization could come far too late. This becomes relevant when the Empire turns toward Mandalore. Palpatine has access to commanders who understand Mandalorian tactics from the Clone Wars. Vader has fought beside Mandalorians and against warriors using similar mobility. Imperial planners have years of Republic intelligence on the system. The Empire also possesses something Bo never had to face during Satine's rule: overwhelming naval superiority under a single central authority. Death Watch was designed for raids, insurgency, and elite combat. Defending an entire star system against star destroyers is a different problem. The first Imperial campaign would likely begin as an enforcement action rather than a declaration of total war. A fleet arrives to compel compliance with an Imperial security decree. Its commander demands access to ports and weapons inventories. Bo refuses. TIE fighters begin patrols through Mandalorian space. Imperial troops attempt to occupy a customs station or communications hub. Mandalorian commandos resist, and somebody fires the shot that turns coercion into open combat. Bo-Katan's forces perform extremely well tactically. Jetpack units devastate exposed infantry. Beskar armored warriors survive hits that would kill ordinary soldiers. Urban fighting inside domed cities favors defenders who know every access corridor and ventilation shaft. Imperial officers trained to defeat separatist droids discover that Mandalorians improvise constantly. Garrisons become vulnerable to raids. Supply depots burn. Local pilots strike transports and disappear into terrain before heavier ships can respond. But tactical excellence cannot solve the strategic imbalance. The Empire can lose hundreds of stormtroopers and replace them. It can rotate ships, it can blockade trade, it can threaten worlds that supply Mandalore. Bo's regime needs fuel and food every day. Civilians cannot live indefinitely inside a warrior myth. Satine understands this before many of Bo's commanders do, and she becomes the voice arguing that survival requires a political war as much as a military one. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma would be sympathetic, but at this early stage neither has an alliance fleet capable of breaking an Imperial blockade. Their resistance networks are still forming. Openly supporting Bo could expose them before they are ready. They might provide money, intelligence, safe routes for refugees, or Senate pressure while avoiding a direct military commitment. Mandalore therefore becomes one of the first places where the limitations of early rebellion are brutally obvious. People may hate what the Empire is doing and still be unable to stop it. Palpatine would prefer to fracture Mandalore before resorting to indiscriminate destruction. A living, productive Mandalore under an Imperial-aligned governor is more useful than a dead planet. Beskar, industry, warriors, and strategic territory all have value. So Gar Saxon's faction rises. He accuses Bo-Katan of dragging the planet into a hopeless war. He promises that Mandalorian traditions can survive under Imperial partnership. Some clans, terrified by blockade and economic collapse, begin to listen. This is where the Darksaber becomes Bo-Katan's burden rather than her solution. For years she used it as proof that Mandalore could unite around its warrior heritage. Now Saxon attacks the legitimacy of how she acquired it. He reminds warriors that Maul defeated Vizsla in honorable combat, and that Bo intervened before the result was completed. He claims Vizsla's dying transfer was an act of desperation, not a lawful succession. Every ambiguity that Bo's regime buried beneath victory returns, because the Empire has discovered how to turn tradition into a weapon. Saxon could challenge Bo publicly. If she refuses, he says she fears the old law. If she accepts, the Empire gets a chance to remove her through a proxy. Unlike Maul, Saxon is Mandalorian, so Bo cannot dismiss him simply as an outsider. The duel would become a referendum on the future of the planet, resistance or accommodation, independence or imperial order. Bo almost certainly accepts. She has built too much of her authority around warrior legitimacy to retreat from a challenge. The confrontation could echo the throne room duel that began this timeline, except now Bo is in Vizsla's position. She holds the Darksaber. Saxon represents the power waiting outside. And somewhere in the background, Sidious is again using Mandalorian custom to achieve a political result without needing to stand in the room. Bo defeats Saxon in the most likely version because she is an exceptional warrior and has years of experience by this point. But victory does not erase his faction. The Empire simply declares Saxon's supporters the lawful provisional government, or finds another collaborator. This is the lesson Bo is forced to learn. The Darksaber can settle a dispute between warriors who agree to respect its symbolism, but it cannot compel a galactic dictatorship to honor Mandalorian rules. The campaign escalates. Star Destroyers move into permanent blockade positions. Bombardments target military facilities, shipyards, anti-air defenses, and communications nodes. The Empire may initially avoid the kind of civilization-ending destruction later associated with the Great Purge, because Palpatine wants submission, not ashes. Yet every Mandalorian success makes the response harsher. Civilian infrastructure becomes collateral damage or deliberate leverage. Sundari's domes, once symbols of how Mandalorians rebuilt after ancient wars devastated their world, become traps under orbital siege. This is the war Bo thought she was preparing for when she overthrew Satine, and it reveals both the strength and the failure of her vision. Mandalore is far harder to conquer than it would have been under a completely demilitarized government. Death Watch commandos kill Imperial troops by the thousands over the course of the occupation. Clans maintain resistance even after cities fall. Bo's emphasis on dispersed weapons caches and martial training ensures that surrendering the capital does not end the war. In that sense, she was right. Strength matters, but Satine was also right. Militarization made Mandalore legible to the Empire as a military problem, and the Empire possesses more military power. Bo restored the culture's capacity to fight, while also creating a state whose identity makes compromise almost impossible. Every Imperial demand becomes an insult to sovereignty. Every Mandalorian refusal becomes proof of rebellion. The logic feeds itself until neither side can retreat without appearing weak. and then Darth Vader arrives. Vader is the answer Palpatine sends when political pressure, collaborators, and conventional occupation have failed to produce obedience quickly enough. He would not need to command every stage of the campaign personally, but deploying him to break the leadership makes strategic sense. The new Empire wants the galaxy to learn that famous warrior cultures are not exempt from Imperial authority. A Sith enforcer defeating the woman who killed Maul and united Mandalore around the Darksaber would send exactly that message. Bo-Katan would not know who Vader truly is. She may have heard Anakin Skywalker's name during the Clone Wars, especially through Obi-Wan and Ahsoka's reputation, but the armored figure, arriving at the head of Imperial forces, is presented as the Emperor's new servant. To Bo, he is simply another outsider, using overwhelming power to demand submission. That resemblance to Maul would infuriate her. Years earlier, she killed one Dark Warrior rather than let him rule Mandalore. Now another has come, stronger politically than Maul ever was, because an entire empire stands behind him. The first encounter would likely not begin as a duel. Bo has learned too much to mistake personal combat for strategy. She knows Vader is a Force user, and whatever intelligence the Mandalorians possess about the Jedi Temple assault and surviving Jedi would warn her that he is exceptionally dangerous. She would order ambushes, overlapping fire, explosives, and aerial attacks, the same kind of tactics that allowed her forces to kill Maul. The problem is that Vader is not Maul at the end of a grueling duel with Vizsla. He arrives prepared, supported by troops, and protected by a power in the Force that has only deepened since Anakin's fall. Mandalorian rockets explode against walls around him. Vader catches warriors in the air and slams them into the ground. Blaster bolts rebound from his blade. Cables that might restrict an ordinary Jedi are torn apart or used to pull attackers toward him. Beskar keeps some commandos alive after blows that should be fatal, but armor cannot stop the Force from crushing the environment around them. Bo watches the tactics that killed Maul fail one by one and realizes that the most dangerous thing about Vader is not merely his strength. It is that the Empire can keep feeding him information until every Mandalorian trick becomes familiar. She nevertheless refuses to kneel. Eventually, the battle narrows into the confrontation Imperial propaganda wants. Bo activates the Darksaber. Vader ignites his red blade. The symbolism is almost too perfect. The weapon Mandalorians associate with ancient sovereignty against the weapon of the Emperor's executioner. Bo fights better than Vader expects. Jetpack bursts constantly alter distance. She uses her blasters with one hand and the Darksaber with the other, never allowing the duel to become a simple lightsaber contest. Wrist rockets force Vader to defend his flanks. A flamethrower floods the corridor with fire. She attacks from above, behind, and through smoke. Her entire style is built around refusing the rules that Jedi and Sith often impose on a duel. But Vader was Anakin Skywalker, one of the finest warriors of the Clone Wars. He spent years fighting opponents who used unconventional weapons, and he possesses far more raw force power than Bo can match. He begins controlling the fight instead of reacting to it. He pins her jetpack against a wall with the Force. He tears a blaster from her hand. When she launches a missile, he redirects it into the ceiling and brings debris down around her. The Darksaber prevents an immediate killing blow, but it cannot create equality between them. Bo loses. The question is what Vader does after. Palpatine might order her execution because a dead symbol cannot lead an army, but the Emperor often prefers living examples when they can be exploited. Capturing Bo-Katan allows the Empire to broadcast her defeat. It allows Gar Saxon or another collaborator to claim that resistance has failed. It also gives Vader access to the Darksaber. If he physically takes it after defeating her, Mandalorian tradition itself becomes a weapon for the Empire. Saxon could argue that Bo lost the blade in combat and therefore lost the authority she claimed through it. Yet Vader has no cultural attachment to the weapon. To him, it is an old lightsaber with political value. Palpatine would understand that value more clearly. The Empire could place it in Saxon's hands without pretending Saxon defeated Vader, or lock it away so no Mandalorian can rally around it. Either choice removes the symbol from Bo at the moment she needs it most. The most dramatic and plausible version is that Bo anticipates this possibility. Before the final defense collapses, she entrusts the Darksaber to a loyal Night Owl and orders it taken off-world. That means she enters her confrontation with Vader using another weapon, or uses the darksaber only long enough to create the impression that it is lost in the destruction. Mandalorian resistance becomes partly a fight to keep the blade beyond Imperial reach. The darksaber is no longer merely her badge of office. It becomes a piece of cultural continuity that must survive even if she does not. Satine becomes equally dangerous to the Empire for the opposite reason. She has no legendary blade and no army loyal to her personally, but she can undermine Palpatine's narrative. She was internationally recognized as Mandalore's legitimate duchess and a leading voice among neutral systems. If she publicly condemns Imperial occupation while also condemning Death Watch's earlier coup, she makes it harder for the Empire to frame the conflict as a simple campaign against extremists. Her message can be that Mandalorians disagreed bitterly among themselves, but none of those disagreements gave Coruscant the right to erase their sovereignty. Imperial intelligence would try to arrest her. Bo's warriors, who once helped overthrow her, may now be assigned to protect her. That is the kind of historical reversal Star Wars thrives on. A night owl, who once guarded Satine's prison cell, could now die keeping stormtroopers away from her evacuation ship. Civilians who hated Death Watch could hide wounded commandos because occupation has changed the meaning of resistance. The distinction between New Mandalorian and Warrior Clan does not disappear, but the Empire creates a larger identity by threatening everyone at once. If Vader captures Satine, the encounter carries a private significance he cannot reveal. Anakin knew Obi-Wan cared for her. He witnessed enough during the Clone Wars to understand that their relationship was far deeper than ordinary diplomacy. Looking at Satine would force Vader to remember Obi-Wan not only as the master who defeated him on Mustafar, but as a man who once loved someone and chose the Jedi anyway. That comparison would be intolerable because Anakin chose differently. He tried to save Padme through possession and fear, helped destroy the Jedi, and lost her anyway. Vader could interrogate Satine about Obi-Wan's location. She genuinely would not know. Obi-Wan vanished after Order 66 and has every reason to keep Tatooine secret from everyone connected to his old life. Satine might infer that he survived if Imperial questions are frantic enough, but she cannot provide a location. Vader would sense that she is not lying, which only makes her more frustrating. She becomes another living fragment of Anakin's past that refuses to give him the one thing he wants. Would he kill her? It is possible, especially if Palpatine decides her political value to the Resistance outweighs any use as bait. But there is a more revealing possibility. Vader cannot bring himself to do it immediately. Not because he has suddenly become good, but because murdering Satine would feel too much like completing Maul's revenge for him. Somewhere beneath the armor, Anakin remembers Obi-Wan speaking to her, remembers the uncomfortable realization that his master had once faced the same choice between love and the Jedi, and remembers that Satine was part of the life Obi-Wan sacrificed rather than possessed. That hesitation would be tiny, private, and furious, but it could give Bo's resistance time to extract her. Satine escaping Vader would become a legend equal to Bo killing Maul. The sisters would now embody two forms of Mandalorian defiance. Bo is the warrior who refuses conquest. Satine is the stateswoman who refuses to let conquest define legitimacy. Their old conflict becomes part of the story rather than the whole story. The Emperor would respond by escalating further. If he cannot break the population through a puppet government, selective occupation, and the defeat of its leader, he begins dismantling the material basis of resistance. Shipyards are seized or destroyed. Beskar mines are placed under Imperial control. Clan strongholds are raided. Children of resistant families are detained. Travel between Mandalorian territories is restricted. The methods are designed not simply to defeat an army, but to make independent political life impossible. This is effectively an earlier version of the process that later devastates Mandalore under Imperial rule, though the exact Great Purge known from later history need not occur at the same moment or in precisely the same form. The important difference is timing. Bo-Katan's Mandalore becomes openly hostile to Imperial control from the beginning of the Imperial era rather than passing through the same sequence of regencies, collaboration, later rebellion, and eventual catastrophe seen in canon. The confrontation is accelerated. That acceleration has consequences for the wider rebellion. Bail Organa cannot ignore a full-scale Imperial campaign against a former neutral world. He still has to protect the secrecy of his own network. but Mandalorian refugees, intelligence, and surviving commandos become valuable assets. Some escape through Alderaanian channels. Others disappear into smuggling routes once used by the Shadow Collective. Bo's earlier decision to seize criminal navigation data after Maul's death now pays off in an unexpected way. Routes meant for spice and weapons become escape corridors from Imperial occupation. Ahsoka could encounter those refugees without ever having participated in the Siege of Mandalore. She already knows Mandalore from her time there during the Clone Wars, when she worked with Satine's government and helped expose corruption. If Bail eventually brings her into his resistance network, reports from Mandalore would matter personally. She would remember Satine. She would remember Deathwatch as an enemy. Then she would have to confront the fact that Bo-Katan, a former Deathwatch terrorist she never allied with during the war, is now one of the Empire's most determined opponents. Their first meeting could therefore happen years later under completely different circumstances. Instead of Bo approaching Ahsoka because they share an enemy in Maul, Ahsoka approaches Bo because they share an enemy in the Empire. There is no friendly history between them. Bo knows Ahsoka by reputation as Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan. Ahsoka knows Bo as Satine's sister, and one of the people responsible for overthrowing the government she once helped protect. Trust would be difficult. Satine, if present, becomes the bridge. She can tell Ahsoka that opposing Bo's past does not require refusing to help Mandalore's people now. Ahsoka, having left the Jedi after seeing how institutions can fail, is unusually capable of understanding that people are not frozen forever in the worst organizations they once served. Bo, meanwhile, would have to accept help from someone associated with the Republic she spent years resisting. The Empire forces both women to separate identity from old allegiance. This later alliance would not recreate the Siege of Mandalore. There is no Maul to capture, no 302nd Company, and no Republic army arriving under Ahsoka's leadership. It would be an insurgent partnership. Intelligence, evacuations, weapons, sabotage, and efforts to keep surviving clans connected. Ahsoka as fulcrum could make Mandalore one node in the emerging rebel network, rather than the isolated battlefield Palpatine wants it to become. Yet Rex would still be missing from that network. If he remains in Imperial service, Ahsoka eventually learning that he survived could become a personal mission. Imagine her receiving a report that an aging clone officer named Rex has been attached to an Imperial pacification force. For Ahsoka, the name would reopen everything she thought she had lost. She knows Fives warned him about the chips. She knows something happened to the clones during Order 66. If she can capture Rex alive, she might finally discover the physical mechanism behind their betrayal. That could lead to Rex's liberation years later, rather than hours after Order 66. Ahsoka removes or disables the chip, and Rex wakes into a nightmare. He has memories of everything he did while controlled. Unlike Canon Rex, who is freed almost immediately and can spend the Imperial era resisting, this Rex may have served the regime for months or years. He may have hunted Jedi. He may have fought Mandalorians. He may have given orders that killed people he would once have protected. His survival becomes far more tragic. If that rescue occurs during the Mandalorian insurgency, Bo-Katan's decision to kill Maul has looped back on itself in a cruel way. The action that prevented Ahsoka and Rex from reuniting at the siege eventually produces a later reunion in the middle of another war for Mandalore. Ahsoka saves Rex not on a crashing cruiser, but after discovering that the Empire has used him as one more stolen weapon. Rex would immediately become valuable to the rebellion. He understands Imperial military procedure because he helped create the doctrine the Empire inherited from the Republic. He knows the 501st. He knows Vader's battlefield instincts better than almost anyone alive, even if he does not initially know Vader's identity. If Ahsoka eventually confirms that Anakin became Vader, Rex is forced to process another impossible betrayal. The general he loved and the regime that enslaved him are the same story. For Bo-Katan, that intelligence could help prolong resistance, but not necessarily liberate Mandalore immediately. The Empire is still too large. The most realistic outcome of the First Occupation War is that Bo loses formal control of the planet. She may escape with loyalists, Satine may escape through diplomatic networks, and the Darksaber may be hidden, but Sundari and major infrastructure fall under Imperial authority. The Empire installs a governor or viceroy backed by local collaborators and stormtroopers. That result mirrors canon in broad shape. Mandalore eventually comes under Imperial rule. But the route is completely different. There was no Maul regime to overthrow, no siege of Mandalore, and no brief Bo-Katan regency granted after a Republic victory. Bo ruled for years before the Empire arrived. Her government had time to militarize, build loyalty, and create defenses. Therefore, the occupation is bloodier from the beginning, and the resistance has deeper roots. Gar Saxon, if he survives his challenge and remains available, is the obvious Imperial figurehead. If Bo kills him during the internal struggle, the Empire can elevate another ambitious clan leader, perhaps even someone less capable but more obedient. The important point is that collaboration still exists because no society is completely united under pressure. Some Mandalorians believe resistance is suicidal. Others seek wealth. Some hate Bo's Death Watch past. Some resent Satine. The Empire turns every old grievance into a recruitment tool. This is why Bo-Katan's earlier unity was always conditional. Killing Maul prevented the immediate split between Maul loyalists and Night Owls, but it did not erase the political divisions beneath Mandalorian society. It postponed them and changed their language. Under the Empire, those divisions reappear as resistance versus collaboration, and the Darksaber remains at the center of it all. Because Maul never takes the Darksaber, its entire later history changes. In canon, Maul carries it away from Mandalore, keeps it through his years of exile, and eventually leaves it on Dathomir, where Sabine Wren finds it during the Age of the Empire. That discovery becomes crucial because Sabine uses the blade as a symbol capable of rallying Mandalorian clans, and she ultimately gives it to Bo-Katan. In our timeline, none of that sequence can happen. The blade never leaves Mandalorian politics in the first place. Bo-Katan has been carrying its burden since the day Vizsla died. That changes Sabine's future, even if every other part of her childhood somehow remains similar. She cannot simply find the Darksaber in Maul's lair because Maul died years before creating that chain of events. If the blade has been hidden by Bo's loyalists, Sabine might one day be tasked with recovering it from a secret Mandalorian vault. If the Empire captures it, she may have to steal it from an Imperial installation. If Bo keeps it through years of insurgency, Sabine's role shifts from becoming the unexpected bearer of a lost symbol to becoming the young warrior who proves that Bo's old symbol still means something to a generation raised under occupation. The absence of Maul changes Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus as well. Maul never survives to Malachor. He never manipulates Ezra, never blinds Kanan during their confrontation, never forms a temporary master-apprentice bond with Ezra, and never uses the fusion of Sith and Jedi holocrons to discover that Obi-Wan Kenobi is alive. His final duel with Obi-Wan on Tatooine never occurs. For Obi-Wan, that means one more ghost from the Clone Wars never comes looking for him. Satine's survival makes Obi-Wan's exile emotionally different too. He still believes he must remain on Tatooine to protect Luke. That responsibility is far larger than his personal desires, and he would not abandon it simply because Satine lives. Yet somewhere in the galaxy, there may be a woman he once loved who is now opposing the Empire in her own way. He cannot contact her without risking Luke, especially if Imperial intelligence monitors every connection to surviving Jedi. The very fact that she is alive becomes another sacrifice he must accept. If Bail Organa knows Satine survived, he would also understand why telling Obi-Wan about Mandalore could be dangerous. Obi-Wan's mission must remain secret. A message intercepted by the Empire could lead Vader directly toward him. So Satine may spend years not knowing whether Obi-Wan survived, while Obi-Wan hears only fragments about Mandalorian resistance, through whatever limited information reaches him. Their story becomes one of separation rather than murder. It is less immediately tragic than canon, but in some ways more enduring. Both live, both know the other may be alive, and neither can safely reach across the galaxy. Bo-Katan has no such luxury. She remains inside the struggle she created. Every Imperial atrocity forces her to confront the path that brought Mandalore here. It would be easy for her to tell herself that everything is Palpatine's fault, and much of it is. The Empire chooses conquest. The Empire chooses repression. But Bo also knows that she helped destroy Satine's government before Palpatine ever declared himself emperor. She helped normalize the idea that armed strength determined political legitimacy. She helped elevate the Darksaber from a cultural symbol into a practical claim to rule. Now those choices shape how Mandalorians respond to occupation. This is where Bo begins becoming the leader later generations recognize. Not because she was always right, but because she has been wrong at enormous cost. She learns that warrior tradition without political wisdom can be manipulated. Maul nearly did it. Palpatine does it on a galactic scale. She learns that unity created through fear lasts only until a stronger fear arrives. She learns that the Darksaber can inspire people but cannot substitute for consent. Most importantly, she learns that saving Mandalore is not the same as possessing Mandalore. Her relationship with Satine would become the moral center of that development. Satine does not need to abandon her principles for the sisters to work together. She can continue arguing that Bo's coup was wrong while helping the people harmed by the Empire. Bo does not need to become a pacifist. She can continue believing that armed resistance is necessary, while admitting that the culture Satine tried to protect contained values worth saving. Mandalore's future might emerge from the synthesis neither sister could accept during the Clone Wars, a society capable of defending itself without worshipping violence as the source of political legitimacy. That idea would be threatening to every Imperial collaborator. If Bo and Satine truly reconcile, Gar Saxon's old argument that Mandalore must choose between warrior strength and pacifist weakness collapses. The Resistance can contain both. Clan warriors can fight while civilian networks provide intelligence. Diplomats can seek allies while commandos sabotage Imperial installations. The Darksaber can remain a symbol without being treated as the only lawful basis for rule. This might even prevent some of the later internal fractures that hurt Mandalore in canon. Bo-Katan's greatest problem has often been legitimacy. She opposes Maul even though he won the Darksaber in combat. Later, she accepts the blade from Sabine rather than winning it through combat, and subsequent Mandalorian belief attaches enormous significance to that transfer. In this timeline, Bo's claim begins earlier and is contested from the beginning, forcing her to confront the weakness of relying on the blade decades sooner. By the time the rebellion matures, she may no longer present herself as ruler merely because she holds it. But Palpatine does not need Mandalorians to believe in his legitimacy. He needs them divided enough that they cannot organize effective resistance. If Bo's coalition begins succeeding, the Empire has one final escalation available: destruction on a scale that makes occupation irrelevant. The possibility of an earlier purge hangs over the entire timeline. Would Palpatine immediately order Mandalore glassed? Probably not. He values resources. Terror works better when survivors can spread the lesson, and a functioning Imperial Mandalore is more useful than a dead one. But if years of insurgency turn the planet into a symbol inspiring other rebellious systems, the calculation changes. At that point, destroying major population centers can become a message to the galaxy. The same militarized unity Bo created to deter invasion could convince the Emperor that Mandalore will never be reliably pacified. This is the terrible endpoint hidden inside Bo's victory over Maul. She prevents a Sith-trained criminal from using Mandalore as his throne, only to preserve enough Mandalorian strength that the Empire considers the world a strategic enemy almost from its birth. The planet may avoid the specific devastation of Maul's civil war and the Republic siege, but it faces Imperial violence earlier and in a more concentrated form. There are reasons to believe the outcome would not be total defeat. Bo has more preparation time than in canon. Death Watch's weapons are not divided between her forces and Maul's loyalists for years. The Shadow Collective's abandoned routes give smugglers ways through blockades. Satine's diplomatic contacts provide connections to early rebel figures. Ahsoka may eventually become an intelligence ally. If Rex is freed later, he adds military knowledge. Mandalore therefore enters the Imperial era with a stronger resistance ecosystem than it possessed immediately after the canon siege. But stronger does not mean safe. The Empire's scale is overwhelming. Bo may spend much of the era fighting from hidden bases, moving between clan territories, and losing ground one district at a time. The Darksaber may spend years concealed, because displaying it too openly would reveal the location of Resistance leadership. Satine may operate from exile again, this time not because Bo forced her out, but because her voice is more useful alive, beyond Imperial reach. Their victory condition becomes survival rather than control of Sundari. That difference would shape the Mandalorian people for generations. Children raised under Bo's regime before the Empire would remember a brief period when Mandalore was independent, armed, and united under its own government. Imperial propaganda could not tell them that Mandalorian sovereignty was merely an ancient myth. Their parents lived it. That memory would make later resistance harder to extinguish. At the same time, those children would inherit the contradictions of Bo's revolution. Some would remember Satine's government as the last peaceful era before Death Watch seized power. Others would remember Bo as the leader who saved Mandalore from Maul. Still others would blame both sisters for failing to prevent Imperial conquest. Mandalorian identity would remain contested, but the argument would be rooted in direct experience rather than distant legend. The New Republic era, if the wider galactic civil war still ends with the Emperor's defeat, would therefore inherit a Mandalore very different from canon. Bo might be older, scarred by decades of resistance, and far less willing to accept a throne, simply because someone hands her the Darksaber. Satine, if she survives that long, would be an elderly stateswoman whose pacifist ideals were tested by occupation, but never completely abandoned. Ahsoka could be a trusted ally without the shared history of the siege. Rex could be a liberated clone, haunted by years he lost to the inhibitor chip. Sabine Wren could emerge into a tradition where the Darksaber never vanished into Maul's possession. Yet none of those later possibilities matter unless the galaxy survives Sidious first. And this is where Maul's death helps the Emperor more than Bo could ever know. Maul was not powerful enough to defeat Sidious in canon, but he was perceptive enough to understand him. By the final days of the Clone Wars, Maul knew the war itself was a trap. He understood that Sidious had engineered a coming transformation, and that Anakin Skywalker was central to it. On Mandalore, he tried to lure Obi-Wan, then tried to convince Ahsoka that they needed to stop Sidious's plan. He failed, but he was one of the only people outside the Sith partnership who could see the shape of the conspiracy before it closed. Bo-Katan kills that witness years earlier. She has no way of knowing what Maul might someday learn or reveal. From her perspective, she is killing the man who manipulated Mandalore, betrayed Vizsla, and is seconds away from claiming its throne. It is the rational choice. But alternate histories are built from exactly these cruel trade-offs. Removing a monster can also remove information that only the monster possessed. Without Maul, Ahsoka never hears that Anakin has been groomed by Sidious. She never hears Maul predict that everything is about to change. Obi-Wan never receives Ahsoka's report about what Maul said. The warning probably would not have saved Anakin by itself in canon, but its absence means one fewer alarm bell sounds as Palpatine closes his trap. The 501st is also less disrupted. Rex and the clones who would have accompanied Ahsoka to Mandalore remain inside ordinary Republic deployment channels. When Order 66 activates, there is no isolated group whose commander is saved, and whose massacre ends with Ahsoka and Rex escaping. From Sidious's perspective, that is cleaner. One of the most famous clone officers of the war remains under Imperial control, at least initially. Ahsoka may still survive because she is outside the military structure, but her survival is invisible. She cannot immediately preserve Rex as proof that clones were compelled. She cannot bury the dead of the 302nd and walk away with direct knowledge of the chip's power. Her route into rebellion becomes slower. This does not stop Bail Organa or Mon Mothma from resisting the Empire, but it removes another experienced bridge between the Clone Wars and the Rebellion. Anakin, meanwhile, falls for essentially the same reasons he does in canon. He fears Padme's death. He distrusts the Council. Palpatine offers forbidden knowledge and emotional validation. Mace Windu moves to arrest Sidious. Anakin intervenes. Sidious kills Mace, names Anakin Darth Vader, and sends him to the Jedi Temple. Nothing about Bo-Katan killing Maul directly exposes Palpatine or neutralizes those pressures. If anything, the missing Ahsoka reunion means Anakin enters the crisis without one of the last positive encounters of his Jedi life. Could Obi-Wan's greater emotional stability still save him? Possibly, but the opportunity is narrow. If Obi-Wan notices Anakin's distress earlier and speaks more openly, perhaps Anakin confesses more. If Satine's survival has taught Obi-Wan to be less guarded about love, Perhaps he recognizes what is happening with Padme before it is too late. But those are second-order possibilities. Anakin has hidden his marriage for years. Palpatine has groomed him since childhood. The Council still sends Obi-Wan to Utapau. The most probable outcome remains Anakin's fall. This is why the scenario cannot end by saying Bo-Katan simply saved Mandalore. She saved it from Maul. That is real. Satine lives because of it. The civil war between Maul loyalists and Night Owls never tears Sundari apart in the same way. The Shadow Collective loses its political center. Mandalore remains under Mandalorian rule for the rest of the Clone Wars. Bo gains the Darksaber years earlier and unites Death Watch rather than leading a resistance against half of it. But every one of those victories carries a cost. Satine's pacifist government is still overthrown because the coup already happened before the duel. Bo becomes the ruler of a state founded through deception and violence. Ahsoka never reconnects with Bo over the hunt for Maul, and therefore never returns to Anakin and Rex for the siege. The 382nd is never formed. Rex is not freed from his inhibitor chip at the moment Order 66 begins. Maul never warns anyone about Anakin's importance to Sidious. Palpatine's final move faces one fewer unpredictable obstacle. Then the Empire arrives and forces Bo to answer the question she avoided when she took the Darksaber. What is Mandalorian strength actually for? If it exists only to prove that warriors deserve to rule, then the Empire has already beaten her philosophy by becoming stronger. If strength exists to protect people, preserve choice, and defend a culture's right to determine its own future, then Bo has to become something different from the Death Watch revolutionary who entered Vizsla's throne room. That transformation is the true legacy of killing Maul. In canon, Bo-Katan's opposition to Maul begins the process of separating her from Death Watch's worst instincts. She is forced into rebellion because she refuses to let an outsider use Mandalorian tradition as a shortcut to power. In this timeline, she reaches the same lesson from the opposite direction. She wins early. She gets the throne. She gets the Darksaber. She gets the united warriors she wanted. And only then does she discover that possessing every symbol of strength does not guarantee Mandalore's freedom. Satine's survival makes that lesson impossible to escape. Every time Bo looks at her sister, she sees the path she rejected. Every time Satine looks at Bo, she sees the reality her own government struggled to answer. Sometimes people who refuse domination must still be defended from those willing to use violence. Neither sister gets to remain comfortable inside the worldview she held at the beginning of the Clone Wars. The Darksaber becomes the perfect symbol for that tension. Bo first takes it in a throne room full of blood because she believes the alternative is Maul. She uses it to unify Death Watch, to rally clans, and to announce that Mandalore belongs to Mandalorians. Later, under Imperial attack, she learns that the blade cannot feed civilians, stop a blockade, expose Sidious, or make divided people trust one another. It can inspire, but it cannot govern for her. It can represent legitimacy, but it cannot create legitimacy where none exists. And that brings us back to the throne room where this timeline began. Maul raises the Darksaber over Vizsla, certain that one final strike will give him a kingdom. Bo-Katan intervenes, kills him, kills Savage, takes the blade, and believes she has prevented Mandalore from being stolen. She is right, but only for a time. She saves Satine from Maul's revenge, prevents the Shadow Collective from becoming the government of Mandalore, and keeps her people under a Mandalorian ruler throughout the rest of the Clone Wars. Yet she also removes the crisis that would have reunited Ahsoka with Anakin and Rex, leaves Sidious's endgame largely untouched, and builds a militarized state that the newborn Empire immediately views as a challenge. So in this alternate history, Bo-Katan's greatest victory becomes the beginning of her heaviest burden. She kills the monster who would have taken Mandalore from her, only to discover that the real threat was always larger than Maul. The Sith Lord who mattered most was sitting on Coruscant, shaping the entire war while Mandalorians fought over who deserved to hold a sword. By the time Bo understands that, the Republic is gone, the Jedi are dead, Anakin Skywalker has become Darth Vader, and the full machinery of the Empire is turning toward her world. Mandalore does not fall to Maul. It does not need a Republic siege to liberate it. Satine is not murdered as part of Maul's revenge, and Bo-Katan does not spend the end of the Clone Wars begging the Republic to help reclaim her home. Instead, Mandalore enters the Imperial Age intact, armed, proud, and already united behind a leader carrying the darksaber. That sounds like the better outcome until the Star Destroyers arrive. And when they do, Bo-Katan finally learns what the darksaber can and cannot give her. It can give her a story. It can give her warriors something to rally around. It can even help her kill Maul. But it cannot decide what Mandalore should become. That choice has to be made by the people who survived the wars fought in its name. Thanks for watching. If there are any other Clone Wars what-if scenarios or characters you want us to explore, leave your ideas in the comments below. And until the next video, may the Force be with you.